It was 7 in the morning in a quiet lakeside neighborhood in Kentucky, and the kind of place where nothing bad ever really happens. Then suddenly, that peaceful morning was interrupted by a horrifying scream. It wasn't arguing or shouting, it was real guttural cries for help coming from inside a nearby home. A man walked outside barefoot, shirtless, and holding a samurai sword after ruthlessly attacking 3 people. One of them was a mother who stepped in to protect her daughter, and now she was bleeding out in the yard, still trying to get away from her attacker. This woman was Teresa Boles. The attacker holding the sword wasn't a stranger. This was a man that also lived inside of that home temporarily. What happened next turned into a multi-county manhunt and a crime scene that investigators would never forget. Welcome to the True Crime Nurse, everybody. My name is Kat, and I'm a registered nurse who loves all things nursing and true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell before you go. I saw the body cam footage of today's video on YouTube with my husband, and I could not believe what I was seeing, so I immediately wrote it down to work on a video for you guys. I haven't seen this case covered anywhere else, and it is a developing story, so let's begin with a little bit of background information on everyone involved. Teresa Ann Boles was born on June 27, 1964, and she grew up in West Kentucky with her sister Tammy. Teresa had 3 children named Victoria, Lauren, and Nick, and she also had 5 beautiful grandchildren that she loved with all her heart. Teresa was a United States Army veteran, and after her military service, she built a civilian life working as a floral designer. She loved working with her hands, and she enjoyed creating beautiful things. She felt that taking something living and making something purposeful out of it gave it meaning, and she truly enjoyed making others happy through her floral creations. At the time of her death, she and her husband Joe were living full-time at their home on Indian Ridge Road in Falls of Rough, Grayson County, Kentucky. They lived in a lakeside community in the western part of the state, built around Rough River Lake. This area is known for its calm waters, fishing, boating, and camping. Rough River Lake is the perfect family area, which makes perfect sense for who Teresa was. Lauren Tabor is Teresa's 32-year-old daughter, and she was living in the Boles' residence with her mom and stepdad, but she didn't come alone. She brought her boyfriend along with her. Teresa's door wasn't just open for her kids, which tells us a lot about the heart that she had. Tommy Greer was 49 years old when today's case takes place, and here is what we know about him. He is a white male, standing about 5 feet 8 inches tall, and he weighed about 155 pounds at the time, just so you have an idea of his overall build. He did have a felony record, but those charges were dropped later on, and he was a guest in Teresa and Joe's home. The only reason that they allowed him to stay there was because Lauren asked them to. So, in December of 2023, Lauren Tabor and George Greer moved into the Boles' residence on Indian Ridge Road in Falls of Rough. Everything changed for the worse the moment that they moved in, though. Ben Starks, the neighbor who lived across the street, said that before Greer and Lauren moved in, the neighborhood was pretty quiet. He described Teresa and Joe as the kind of neighbors that you barely noticed in the best way possible, and that they kind of just kept to themselves. Now, Falls of Rough is a small town, and the Indian Valley subdivision is even smaller, so it seems that the neighbors tend to know everything about everyone there, as it happens in most small towns. Then he added, it wasn't until recently, when the other 2 younger individuals moved in, that there was a little bit of yelling and arguing, but no physical violence or anything like that. So I mean, in all honesty, they hadn't been horrible neighbors. They mainly just kept to themselves. So between December 2023 and the morning of February 5th, 2024, what we know is this. Things had become volatile inside the Boles' home. Stark noticed it from across the street. He heard arguments and raised voices, and this was new. Greer was using drugs, and he openly admitted to this to the police, and he wasn't the only one in the household using them. Remember how I just mentioned that this is a small community? Well, the neighbors said that Greer wasn't the only ones using them too. They said that it also seemed that Teresa and Lauren were on them as well, allegedly. Now, we can't confirm that information, so I will add an allegedly in there. But for now, just understand that whatever was driving the arguments in that household in the weeks before February definitely had a chemical component to them, and Tommy Greer was not in his right state of mind. The tension that had been building inside that house had reached a breaking point. February in Falls of Rough is cold. The Rough River area sits in the western part of Kentucky, and February mornings there sit well below freezing. Rough River Lake is gray and still in the winter, and the Indian Valley subdivision is typically pretty quiet. Most of the properties there are seasonal, and in February, the full-time residents like Teresa and Joe and their year-round neighbors are on their own out there. Sometime that morning, though, a fight broke out inside the Boles' home, and it was between Lauren Tabor and her boyfriend, Tommy Greer. This argument was different from the others, though, because it had escalated and become physical and loud, and Lauren's parents were home for this fight. They heard what was going on between the couple, and they did what any good parent would do. Teresa and Joe intervened. They stepped in between their daughter and the man who was fighting with her, because that's a natural human instinct to protect your child. In that moment, Teresa Boles was simply being a mother. What Greer did next is something that no parent who opened the door to their child's partner could ever anticipate. He went and grabbed a sword. Let's talk about what a samurai sword actually is, because I think it's important to understand what Greer chose to pick up and what that weapon is actually capable of doing to a human body before we say what happened next. A traditional samurai sword or a katana has a blade between 23 and 29 inches long. It's a single-edged, curved, and tapered to a point blade, and the cutting edge is designed for one thing and one thing only: to sever. We will talk more about this later on into today's video. Greer was not a trained swordsman. In fact, again, he was only 155 pounds, but he was high in a small house at 7 o'clock in the morning. With a weapon that dangerous, training isn't required because the sword does all the work for the person that's holding it. All he needed was the willingness to swing it at people who had no way to stop him, and being under the influence made him believe that this was a rational reaction to a mom stepping in to protect her daughter. Greer went into a blind rage, and he attacked all three people who were present in the home: Teresa Boles, Joseph Boles, and his girlfriend Lauren Tabor. On the morning of February 5th, the neighbor across the street woke up to the sound of screaming. This wasn't arguing like he'd heard before. These were guttural screams for help. He ran to his window, and what he saw was a man who had on no shirt and no shoes walking across the property outside the Boles' house, carrying a samurai sword. Tommy Greer was trying to force Lauren Tabor to go back inside the house. Think about how terrifying that must have been for a second. Greer had just attacked 3 people, and here he was outside, still holding the sword, apparently trying to force his girlfriend back inside. What was going to happen to her if she went back inside with him? Evan Bradley, who was another neighbor, was woken up by his wife after she heard screaming and she saw a woman covered in blood outside. She woke up Bradley, then he grabbed his shotgun and immediately ran outside. Seeing that shotgun actually scared Greer. Both neighbors, so Bradley and Starks, pointed their guns right at him, and then he let Lauren go. Then Greer eerily just walked back inside the house. Greer then made a couple of decisions that tell us a lot about his mental state at the time, even in the middle of a drug-fueled rampage. He found a pair of pants, and then he realized he needed to get out of there, otherwise he would be caught by the police. He attempted to steal a truck outside as his getaway vehicle, but that didn't work out, so he decided to steal a blue minivan that still had the keys in it. He understood that he was exposed, that he needed to cover himself up and get dressed, and he also understood that he needed to escape. These decisions required mental clarity, which is pretty unusual for someone that's under the influence. He knew what he had done, and he wasn't so far gone that he had lost all survival instincts. Let me know if you find that strange too. Greer came back outside, got into the minivan, and threw it in reverse. Starks and Bradley said that Greer backed the van up so rapidly towards Bradley's house that they believed that Greer was genuinely going to run them over. The neighbors each then fired one warning shot into the vehicle, and it shattered the rear window. Then Greer punched the gas pedal, accelerating forward away from them all on Indian Ridge Road. This murderer was now on the run.
Greer. Well, you probably have to call Brick County, around the town for that.
Attempt to locate?
Yeah.
Oh. You having him go?
He'll go. You can stay with me.
Here. You want on this tree? Go down there in that yard of the carport looking thing? Okay.
I think for safety we ought to clear that house off.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
This one. Now we've got a husband and wife and child.
Be careful for sharks.
He was gone before the first law enforcement officers even arrived, and the Grayson County Sheriff's Office received the call and contacted Kentucky State Police Post 4 for backup at 7:40 that morning. The neighbors decided to run over to the house to check on everybody now that Greer was gone, because one of them actually had EMT training and heard all those cries for help coming from the house. He and his neighbor were shocked to find Teresa Boles and Lauren Tabor in the front yard, and Teresa was gravely wounded. Teresa's pulse was weak, so Starks actually began CPR on her, but her pulse faded. Sadly, Teresa died at the scene as they were waiting for help to arrive. The men decided to check on Joseph inside the house too, and they discovered that Joseph Boles had been struck with the sword as well, but thankfully he was still alive. He had sustained life-threatening injuries that required immediate help, so the men stayed with him until help got there. Lauren Tabor had also been hit by the sword and sustained injuries that were severe but not life-threatening, but we know that Teresa Boles had already succumbed to her injuries. Tommy Greer had murdered his girlfriend's mom in cold blood. Teresa was found outside of the home in the neighbor's front yard, which is not where she had been attacked inside the home. This means that after Greer had initially struck her with the sword, she was trying desperately to get away from him. She walked or stumbled from inside of their home to the outside, she crossed a doorway, and she crossed property lines to get away. She was still alive when she got there, and it is sickening to know that she was trying her best to get away from this man and call for help. When law enforcement and EMS finally reached Indian Ridge Road, they found a horrifying scene. Teresa Boles was laid out in the neighbor's yard, and she was pronounced deceased by Grayson County Coroner Joe Brad Hudson and Deputy Coroner James Embry. Joseph Boles was transported by helicopter from a landing zone at Rough River Dam State Resort Park to University of Louisville Hospital, and Lauren Tabor was transported by EMS by ground to Owensboro Health Twin Lakes Regional Medical Center in Litchfield. Now, before we go into the manhunt and investigation, I want to talk a little bit about the autopsy in this case, at least based on what we do know. Here are the only confirmed facts that were released from the coroner and law enforcement. Teresa Boles was murdered with a samurai sword. She was pronounced dead at the scene, but had enough time to run away from Greer, and that the manner of death was clearly homicide. Her body was transported to the medical examiner's office for her autopsy, and her death certificate classified her cause of death as from sharp force injuries. That is the full publicly confirmed picture, but I still want to walk through a little context with you before we move on to what happened next. Every autopsy begins with the external exam, starting with a full head-to-toe body assessment, which includes her clothing. Teresa's clothing was carefully removed, documented through pictures, and packaged as evidence for the investigators. In victims with sharp force injuries, x-rays can help to look for any retained blade fragments in the wounds, including pieces of steel that would break off on contact with bone. Now, a katana blade is designed to flex instead of break or shatter, so retained fragments coming from a katana are far less common than a knife, but the imaging can actually help to confirm if there are any pieces left behind. Teresa was found outside of the house with a weak but palpable pulse, meaning that they could feel that her heart was still beating, but she still died within minutes of being found. Without the exact location or depth of each wound being released just yet, here's what this clinically tells us. As we heard in the Nia Wilson case, if an artery as crucial as the carotid is struck, then you can become unconscious within seconds to a couple of minutes. Teresa was not unconscious within 30 seconds. In fact, she was mobile. That should tell us that if an artery was struck, it may have only been nicked, or perhaps it wasn't an artery that was hit at all, and it could have been a lower pressure vessel like a vein. We do know that she hemorrhaged or bled to death and that it was fast, but it was not instant. And in those minutes, she was outside in the cold February air in someone else's yard, and two neighbors were trying their best to keep her alive. Teresa's toxicology results have not been made public, so we can't confirm whether or not she was under the influence too, but no matter what, that wouldn't change the fact that she is a victim in this case. Greer did argue that the dispute between him and Lauren was over drugs, and he suggested that Teresa was on them as well, but we don't have the information just yet to confirm that. Greer's tox screen was collected from blood and urine at the time of his arrest on February 5th. The police took these samples to identify and confirm the specific substances that he had already admitted to using. He admitted to using both bath salts and other drugs that cause paranoia, auditory and visual hallucinations, extreme agitation, loss of any social inhibition, And they give you superhuman strength because adrenaline is flooding the system on these substances. A person in a drug-induced psychosis can attack people that they love and care about because they have completely stopped experiencing them as the people that they know and love. The level of violence in this case, including a naked man with a sword attacking 3 people, then pursuing his girlfriend, is clinically consistent with stimulant psychosis. Being under the influence does not excuse his actions, but it does give us an understanding of why something happened the way that it did. Now, to bring us back to where the manhunt began, George Tommy Greer had had a head start of somewhere between 30 to 40 minutes on law enforcement. He had a vehicle with a destroyed rear window, which did make it pretty easy for the police to spot while they were searching for him, a drug habit, and no clear plan. What happened next was a 6-hour, multi-county, multi-agency manhunt that stretched across 9 miles of rural western Kentucky. Here is every confirmed move that Greer made based on the police report. Greer first drove the 2008 Chrysler Town & County minivan 6.2 miles from Indian Ridge Road. Then he abandoned it on Hollow Church Road just off of Owensboro or Highway 54. This is just west of Short Creek. Before he abandoned the van, though, he broke into a nearby home and stole clothes to make it harder to identify him. So, between the first crime scene and the very first stop, Tommy Greer had already murdered 1 person, attacked 2 others, one of which was in critical condition, by the way, and now he was committing a first-degree burglary. This was a very dangerous man on the loose. The police located that van by using a helicopter overhead, but they didn't find him there. The manhunt was still on. On his second stop, Greer stole a Chevy Impala from a residence off of Amy Way in Short Creek. He took their vehicle and drove it to the Grayson, Ohio County line, so now we have another burglary charge here. On the third stop, a Grayson County jailer named Jason Woosley saw Greer driving the Impala on Owensboro Road or Highway 54 at approximately 1:20 that afternoon. Now, he was not a patrol police officer, but he was armed and alert, so Woosley decided to pursue the Impala. Greer drove to a farm field off of Edwards Cemetery Road, where the Impala actually got stuck in the mud, so he got out of the car and ran by foot into the nearby wooded area. KSP troopers and local officers worked together with a K-9 unit and now 2 circling overhead helicopters from KSP's Aircraft Support Branch. At 1:28 in the afternoon, George Tommy Greer was finally found, apprehended, and taken into custody on Edwards Cemetery Road. He did not resist, and the sword was not with him. So the total distance from the crime scene to the arrest location was 9 miles, and the total time that it took them to find him between the 911 call to arrest was almost 6 hours. Just to get an idea of the amount of resources and effort that it took to find Greer, I'm going to list off the amount of agencies that participated in this search. Grayson County Sheriff's Office, KSP Post 4, Leachfield Police Department, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, Grayson County EMS, Falls of Rough Volunteer Fire Department, Greater Hardin County Narcotics Task Force, Caneyville Police Department, Ohio County Sheriff's Office, Breckenridge County Sheriff's Office, Kentucky Fire Department, and Fish and Wildlife, and the Grayson County Detention Center all worked together to hunt this man down. I believe that that is the most agencies I have ever seen involved in any one case. Let me know if you've heard of any others that involve more than that. Before we get into the interrogation and legal proceedings, I do want to touch on the crime scenes a little bit more because there were several in this case. When KSP Post 4 and Grayson County deputies arrived at Indian Ridge Road that morning, they were walking into a scene that had already spread beyond the walls of the house. The Boles' home was, of course, the first and primary scene, and this is where the initial attacks happened. In the body cam footage that was released, you can see that there was blood in multiple places throughout the home, and I will show you what I can of the crime scene.
You rolling?
Yes. You?
No.
Oh.
Out back, guys.
Huh?
I'm out back.
Okay. Norman's out back.
Lots of blood out here.
There's lots of blood in here.
Clear.
What?
Clear back here.
Okay.
There's the bathroom.
Norman, You want me to just step around the blood, tiptoe?
Yeah.
All right, hold on. I got smaller feet.
Utility room to your back.
One of the most heartbreaking pieces of evidence that's seen in that video is that there is a pretty clear blood-smeared handprint on the wall that clearly had come from someone on the move towards the door. We know that Teresa was trying desperately to get away from Greer, so this was likely a haunting piece of evidence to support the path that she took to get away from him. Any impact spatter, transfer marks, and the position of every item disturbed during that attack were all documented by the police. The samurai sword was recovered outside of the home, so Greer did not take that with him. That weapon was documented and had photos taken of it before they collected it, and then they sent it to the Kentucky State Police Lab for forensic analysis. They conducted DNA swabbing of the blade to identify the DNA of each victim, fingerprint processing of the handle, and they also took measurements of the blade for comparison to the wound measurements at autopsy. The secondary scene was where Teresa Boles' body was found in the neighbor's front yard, and Lauren was found there as well, emotional and in distress alongside her mom. The 2008 Chrysler minivan needed to be treated as a crime scene as well. Its interior surfaces, including the steering wheel, door handles, seat, and gear shift, were all processed for any DNA transfer from Greer's hands and clothes. The police also needed to document the 2 bullet impacts to the back of the vehicle as well. They collected that information to corroborate the story from the neighbors, and the ballistic evidence was collected. They also investigated at the home that Greer broke into to steal clothes. They needed to document how he broke in, what location he accessed, any items that were taken, and any biological evidence that he may have left behind. The Chevy Impala, which was the second car that he stole that was found stuck in the mud, was also processed the same way that the minivan was for any additional evidence. As far as witness statements go, other than the victims, Ben Starks and Evan Bradley were the primary eyewitnesses because they weren't directly involved in what happened. They told police about the full timeline, starting at 7 that morning, Greer's physical description at the time that he was outside, and that he was carrying the sword. Then they talked about the interaction between Greer and Lauren, where he was trying to force her to go back into the house, but then eventually he gave up. They also needed to defend their decision to shoot at the minivan and what they did to help all of the victims once Greer got away. Lauren Tabor was both a victim and the only person who was present inside the home from the beginning to the end of the entire incident. Her story has not been shared publicly, which makes perfect sense because I'm sure that the police are going to want to save that for trial. George Greer himself provided multiple incriminating statements during his interrogation with the KSP detective Brian Washer. Greer outright admitted to being under the influence of drugs, and not just one, he said that he was on multiple of them. He also admitted to killing Teresa, admitted to attacking Joseph and Lauren, and admitted to stealing both of the vehicles. This was all recorded on video. Throughout the entire interrogation, he repeatedly professed his love for Lauren and seemed incredibly out of touch with reality because here is a man that is confessing to murdering her mother and trying to murder her, but he was so emotional about how much he loves her. Now think back to the drug-induced psychosis that we talked about earlier during the autopsy portion. Is this not a perfect example of substances making you lose social inhibition and not seeing your loved ones as who they truly are? George Tommy Greer has been charged with 2 counts of attempted murder and 1 count of murder. He was also charged with first-degree burglary, theft by unlawful taking for an automobile, fleeing or evading police in the first degree by motor vehicle, and fleeing or evading police in the first degree on foot. 2 days after Teresa's death, so on February 7th, 2024, George Greer stood in front of the Grayson Circuit Court for his arraignment. He was appointed a public defender, and his bond was set at $500,000. He, of course, could not post bail, so he went back to jail. But before he entered his plea, something strange happened. Greer turned to face the people of that courtroom and he asked, "Are you going to pray for me and my family?" And then he pleaded not guilty. Please tell me that I am not the only one that's surprised by this. He admitted to everything that he did on tape just 48 hours earlier, but he pled not guilty. The man who had told Kentucky State Police on the day of the murder that he'd been under the influence of drugs and had killed 1 female and brutally attacked 2 other people with a samurai sword, that same man had the audacity to stand in court and say that he wasn't guilty. The Grayson County Grand Jury returned with a formal indictment in March of 2024 with all the same charges that we already went over, but they added a charge called persistent felony offender in the second degree, or PFO2. Now, I had to look a little further into this because I wasn't familiar with this charge. PFO2 in Kentucky requires the defendant to have at least one prior felony conviction. A grand jury reviewed the evidence and determined that there was probable cause to indict Greer as a persistent felony offender, meaning he had done this before. His previous offense wasn't murder, but he had felony convictions before he ever stepped foot into Teresa Boles' house in December of 2023. Tommy Greer's first pretrial conference was held on May 21st, 2024. His defense attorney informed the court that the prosecution had received an exceptional amount of discovery material, including physical evidence, forensic reports, the autopsy findings, toxicology results, tons of body camera footage, witness statements, the arrest citation, and even more documents to review. The volume of material was massive, so the defense was requesting additional time to be able to go over all of it to prepare for trial, and the court granted a new pretrial date of July 23rd, 2024. So they were granted 2 additional months to review the evidence and search for anything that they could to argue that Greer was innocent because, again, he pleaded not guilty. There is still no trial date set at the time that I'm recording this video, but I will be sure to keep an eye on it. In Kentucky, a murder charge carries a sentence of 20 years to life or life without the possibility of parole. With that PFO2 enhancement charge, though, that I just talked about, the court's minimum sentencing range is actually higher than that. Each count of attempted murder carries 10 to 20 years, and the first-degree burglary charge carries 10 to 20 years as well. The theft and 2 fleeing charges carry additional time on top of all of that. George Greer was 49 years old when he stole Teresa Boles' life. On the low end of the combined sentencing, even if every sentence were to run concurrently or at the same time, he's looking at a minimum of 20 years. Running the serious counts consecutively, which is of course up to the court, produces a sentence that ensures he will never leave prison. He will likely spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. No matter what happens during trial and sentencing, though, it will not give Joe Boles his wife back, and it will not undo what Lauren Tabor had to watch happen to her mother. It won't erase the trauma of what happened either. No amount of justice or time can erase what happened on the morning of February 5th, 2024. Teresa Boles was a protective mother and grandmother. Substances cannot override the significance of that. She stepped in when she felt that her child was in danger, and I think that any mom is listening right now would have done the same thing. I'm sending Teresa, Joe, Lauren, and their loved ones all my love, and I pray that Teresa is resting peacefully. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to Teresa's story, and of course for spending time with me too. Let me know what you thought about today's video, and like I mentioned earlier, I will be keeping an eye out for any updates on trial. I hope that you've had a wonderful week, and as always, don't forget to take the best care of your heart, please, and do something good for your mental health this week. Nurse's orders. Oh, also don't forget to drop a butterfly in the chat if you made it this far into today's video. I will see you next time. Bye.